thank you to Strategic Law Partners for sponsoring this podcast. Strategic Law Partners was formed to provide the highest quality, common sense legal services at reasonable rates. Over its 25-year history in Los Angeles, Strategic Law Partners has represented many of the top local venture-backed companies, leading early-stage and late-stage investors, PE firms, and more. SLP Ventures has invested in over 75 companies, mostly in the Los Angeles area. Thank you to Brad and team. Hello, and welcome to the LA Venture Podcast. This is Minnie Ingersoll, host of the podcast and partner at 10110. 10110 is a seed stage fund here in LA. All opinions expressed on this show by me and my guests are solely our own. Andrew Glazier is the CEO of Defy Ventures. Defy Ventures is a nonprofit that works with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated entrepreneurs. They have an inspiring entrepreneurship program and also a new fund that helps fund entrepreneurs coming out of prison. Unlike many accelerators or venture funds, Defy goes really deep on the personal coaching and operates on the premise that being a successful entrepreneur is about building the right mindset of belief in oneself and courage. I've seen the program in action, and I think there are going to be a ton of lessons we can all learn from Andrew today. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, and thank you for the great work that you're doing.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, I love Defy Ventures, as you know, but maybe you could just start with telling us more. It's not like a lot of the VCs that I have on the show. So give me some of the basics of the program you're running.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a national nonprofit, and we work with currently and formerly incarcerated adults. And we use entrepreneurship to change mindsets, to give people with criminal histories their best shot at a second chance. When we start with people who are incarcerated, what we're doing with them is we are hooking them in with this idea of starting a business. To be a successful entrepreneur, right, you have to believe you have something to give the world, right? Something to sell. Once people come out, we continue that support for them, initially with the reentry and career support, but then eventually for those who do wish to pursue that business, we provide continued training, and then we have an accelerator program where we really look to find some of our what we call entrepreneurs in training, or EITs, and we select them for the accelerator program. And then with the help of volunteers like you, we're able to then work with them to launch a small business.
Great. So many questions. So just the program that you're running inside the prisons, that's, I've forgotten now. It's a 9-week course. People are spending 10 hours a week. Like, it's a pretty intensive program.
Yeah. It's actually about 9 months.
Oh,
7 to 9 months. But it's 10 to 15 hours of work per week. It's a 1,200-page curriculum. And then at the end of it, we have a business pitch competition in prison. And it's kind of Shark Tank style, but that's where we have volunteer judges that come in, and these EITs pitch their business. And we have a competition.
So when you talk about the mindset change, you said, okay, a lot of the people in prison have a lot of the qualities. So I would say when I visited, the people I met, they had a ton of hustle. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of grit, and they were they had a lot of entrepreneurship. Now, it may have been slightly, it was different entrepreneurship than I usually think about entrepreneurship. But is that what you meant? And what are you doing when you coach the mindset change? And
yeah, in the past we've talked about Defy as far as like transforming hustle, right? A lot of it is about instilling some focus and putting some parameters around what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? To say, look, you've got skills, right? I mean, most people in prison that are in our program have been business owners before. It just wasn't likely a legal business. But as I say in prison, when I'm talking to folks is, look, just because the business you ran may have operated in a difficult regulatory environment with questionable HR practices, doesn't mean it wasn't a business, right? And those skills can be transferred to legal business. And it's a lot of it is about contextualizing things they may already know how to do and just saying, look, let's put some different language on that. Let's put some different frameworks around that. And now let's talk about something you want to do that is going to make a positive difference in your community. And that's where that personal piece comes. It's like, hey, where did you come from? And who do you want to be? And we've got people, we work in maximum security, the highest security prison in California, all the way down to moderate and a little bit of minimum security. But for the most part, we're working in moderate maximum security facilities with men and women. And now you were there at sort of the midpoint when they were really just forming their entrepreneurial ideas at that point. That's where we're giving them some coaching on how to focus some of that stuff.
Yeah, I was there they were working on personal statements, and their personal statements were incredibly impressive, but there's also some self-limiting beliefs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the first thing we talk about when we start the class is this idea of self-limiting beliefs, right? If you're going to be an entrepreneur, right, you need to be able to believe in yourself, right? So let's explore that. What is the stories that you tell yourself about what you can't do? And now let's blow those things apart. And so much about what we do in Defy is about that narrative change and taking accountability for their past, thinking about who they want to be and what they're doing to transform, and creating a vision for their future. And I think that is such a deeply human exercise. And I think one of the reasons it's so moving for volunteers when they come in is that they realize that they've been on their own journey, right? We've all made mistakes, right? We've all done things that, we may regret, and, coming to terms with those things and not letting those things define us, even if nobody else knows about them, right? But how are you defining those things internally? And those self-limiting beliefs are things that prevent all of us from achieving the things we want to achieve.
So, can we talk a tiny bit about the steps to the line game? Because it is
totally,
such a powerful game. And you have a question in there that has something to do with, what's the worst thing you've ever done, right? Tell me about, or tell our listeners, because I participated in some of the questions and how that works.
Yeah, so the steps to the line exercise is one of the most, one of the deepest exercises we do. And the way it works is we have our entrepreneurs in training, our EITs line up on one side. We have all of our volunteers line up on the other side. And then we ask a series of questions that range from, the kind of silly, like who's your, who in the room loves Taylor Swift, to, right. And step to the line if, your parents tucked you in every night and told you they loved you. Right. And what we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve there is this moment of empathy where we start to see how we are more similar than we are different along the way, and also to recognize where there are important differences. And certainly, we're exploring questions of privilege in there, but I don't think that's the most powerful piece of it. I think the most powerful piece of it is this idea of we're all humans and we can be empathetic with each other, and find that shared humanity and realize that we are more alike than we're different.
Yeah. Well, some of those you asked some questions that are deep, like who has struggled with addiction in their family or some of that stuff. Right. Where the volunteers, who are mostly, the business community, step to the line, as well as the EITs.
That's right.
But then, who got tucked in and felt loved when they went to bed? It was a very disproportionately one side of the room.
Yes, or who was arrested before the age of 15, right?
Yeah.
Which are some of the heartbreaking questions in there that I think are so important to the recognition that we all, we come from different realities in life, and and in many cases, but for where you were born, right, and what you had in the first 10 years of your life, right, your life path might have been very, very different.
One of the questions you asked that was a very shared humanity question was, because you were leading the session when I was there, was who feels nervous to be here today?
Right, yeah.
And, I was in a men's prison, and it was, I was nervous, but so was a lot of the room that was facing me,
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people, so we ride the bus in, right? I think you came in on the bus with me. And as we ride the bus in, I always say like, hey, who's nervous? And then, people sort of put their hand up and I'm like, listen, however nervous you are, the folks we're about to meet are more nervous, right? And because in many cases, the volunteers that come in may be the first people who did not either live or work at that prison that those individuals have met in years. And that is nerve-wracking, right? Yeah. And they're going to get in there and like start to share about themselves. And these are all not norms inside a prison. So it's a big moment when we're doing that for the EITs to have that opportunity to sit across from somebody not behind bars, right? And have that human interaction and to start to be treated like somebody who is smart and has value to add and can be respected. And that's a big deal.
I mean, there's so many stories, but I'm going to stick with your program for a second rather than my stories, my visit. Anything else about the entrepreneurship? My audience is more entrepreneurs here.
Sure.
When you're talking about how to launch a business or some of the basics of entrepreneurship that apply to all of us that you think have been really good parts of your program.
Yeah. So, I think a lot of times when I'm speaking with individuals in the VC community, and I'll talk about entrepreneurship, I'll talk about, the parameters of the businesses we support are less than $20,000 of startup capital, cash flow positive within 3 months, shouldn't require a physical storefront, and should be built on some experience you already have, right? And it always amuses me a little bit when I talk to folks in the community who are like, well, you can't start a business for that. Right. Right? That's not possible, right? And my feeling is always, well, au contraire, right? Mm-hmm. Because I see it happen all the time, right? Entrepreneurship in the sort of small business world, the sort of neighborhood world, I think a lot of times can get lost. The basics are the same, right? How do you come up with something that people want? How do you make more money than you're spending, right? Mm-hmm. And then how do you market it and get it out there? But we're doing it at this level of kind of micro neighborhood businesses, and we see it happen that when folks come out, and not everybody who does the program comes out and necessarily decides to launch a business, which is fine. What we want them to not do is go back to prison. So what we're really hoping for is initially they get a job that will sustain them, and then for the percentage who do want to pursue that business, we see it over and over again where it's the commercial cleaning business or the fitness business or the food business. One of our volunteers is a great guy. His name is Mark Bowles. He's a VC down in the San Diego area. And he mentored one of our folks that came home and helped him launch a commercial cleaning business. I remember sitting down with him. He's like, you know what? Timothy, who was the EIT, he is the hardest working, most talented entrepreneur I have ever met. Because this guy will bust through any walls in front of him and work incredibly hard, and it feels entitled to nothing. Right. And, he's like, that's a guy I know is going to be successful. And, Timothy is a guy we were able to fund through Defy, and with a $7,000 initial investment, this guy built a commercial cleaning business.
Do you have a fellow named Ian on your staff?
Indeed. Yes.
And Ian said something really powerful that stuck with me, which is the people in prison. I forget how long he was in prison, but it was
12 years.
12 years. Yeah. And he said something like, there are people who come out of prison better and they make that choice. And there are people who don't come out better, but you make a choice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, agency is something we take for granted, right? In the world, right? You and I have a ton of agency, like whether we agree, whether we choose to embrace our agency, right, whatever, right? But I mean, we have a lot of free will. We can decide what we're going to do every day for the most part, right? When you're in prison, you get to make 10 decisions a day, right? 10, that's it. Think about the number of decisions you make in the first hour of your waking moments, right? But so But what we try to do in our program through entrepreneurship is restore a measure of agency, right? To say, look, you've got some choices in front of you now, right? And you know what? Let's talk about some of the smaller choices programmatically of like, do you want to do this business? Do you want to do that business? Right? But then that grows into like, who do you want to be? Right? Because you've got some choices right now, even if you're still going to be locked up for a while, even if you're still going to be locked up for the rest of your life. And we have some of those, right? You have some agency about what you choose to do with your time. And that is what, a lot of what Ian was talking about is finding agency inside of prison to start to make some choices about who you want to be.
So powerful. Whew. One of the things you also asked on the Steps of the Line game was who's been in isolation for more than a week, a month,
a year, 5 years, 10 years.
God. So, and 5 years, I don't know, 10 years, like people were stepping to the line. It was really terrifying. So maybe could we talk about just Defy Ventures and what you're trying to do and what is the overarching, what is the state of sentencing and criminal justice, if you use that word, I don't know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think of our advocacy in a little bit of a subversive way most of the time, which is that when we bring people in, a lot of people think they're coming in and they may come in with different motivations. Some people think they're like, oh, I want to go inside and see a prison and say that I've done that. Other people are coming in, because they want to learn more about the justice system. Other people are coming in because, they want to, do service, right? But everybody walks out of that day, right, realizing that whatever they thought about the criminal justice system was wrong, right, and who was inside it, and that, the world is not what they thought it was when they walked in that morning. And what I hope to do with that is get people to vote, right? To start to think critically about what it means to vote for politicians who just want to lock people up and throw away the key, and what it means to be an employer and to be part of the solution as a member of the business community by employing people or investing in people.
Because employment, I think employment is a huge driver of recidivism.
Number one, if you are unemployed, the number one factor most likely to send you back to prison.
Right. And so entrepreneurship seems more important than ever.
Yeah. For us, right, we our first hope is that our first goal when people come out of prison is, let's help you get settled, make sure you have access to services, and let's help you get a job, right? And so one of the things we look for from our volunteer base is people who are willing to employ and have entry-level jobs and are willing to say, I will be a fair chance employer, and I will at least interview people who have finished the Defy program. Great. The next piece for us is to say, okay, you have your job, you're stable. Do you want to pursue entrepreneurship? And to give them that opportunity, and importantly, access to capital if they're willing to work hard and get there. And that segues into this idea of this venture fund that we're creating. It's a philanthropic venture fund, but a venture fund nonetheless. And the idea behind that is to say, look, we have built out this selective accelerator program for, we're hoping we can push, 25 businesses through per year. For those 25 people coming through, we want to give them high quality mentors, intensive coaching, a little bit more curriculum, but they actually don't need that much more, right? Stuff like building a financial model, how to incorporate their business, stuff like that. And then having enough money to be able to give them up to $10,000 of a seed grant that they don't have to pay back. And then they can employ other people who are formerly incarcerated. And so that's where that circle starts to take off. So that's
and let me put in another bit of a plug there. You're running a really lean organization too. And so people who want to give money to support your entrepreneurs, it's going straight to those entrepreneurs.
Oh yeah. For the venture fund in particular, 90% of that is regranted directly. Right. So I'm excited to say we just won a major federal grant to support the, most of the operating costs of this program. And we have this opportunity in front of us right now to invest frankly, primarily with people of color, because that's unfortunately who we incarcerate in this country at, over-indexed for Black men, a 6 times rate of white men, right? So when we're talking about funding potential businesses and really focusing racial justice, economic justice, social justice, this is where it's at.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate the work you're doing, Andrew. So, maybe changing gears a bit. Should we talk more about this amazing fund, or should we talk about, let's just talk about the experience of you show up in your program and it's a human tunnel, right?
Right.
You've got Pharrell or someone playing.
There's music.
I can't remember who, but it's,
coming in. Yeah. I mean, look, we try to make the event a really fun day, right? It's deep, but we also try to make it a fun day that everybody's going to remember, especially the folks inside who don't get fun days very often. But when people get there, right, I think, for volunteers, the first thing they remember is walking through the big giant iron gates and having those clank shut behind them, because then it's real.
Yeah.
Right? You're inside. Yeah. And then you're greeted by all these men or women, in their prison blues, who are super excited to see you.
Yeah.
And when you are inside a prison, you have no choice but to be fully present.
It was so intense. I was chatting with someone. Oh no, it was Emily Proctor, who said that she didn't know the difference between prison and jail.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it just emphasizes the stratification of our society. That plenty of people have no contact and plenty of people have way too much contact.
100%. Yeah.
But, I didn't know all the sentencing guidelines. Like, a life sentence is far worse than 20 years to life.
So life sentence, it's interesting thing about life sentence is if somebody just gets life, right? What that means is they will be in prison a minimum of 7 years before they can go to the parole board to be considered for release, right? When you hear 20 to life, what you're hearing is they have to do a minimum time of 20 years before they may be considered for parole. And then they may be denied parole forever, right? But they can go back to that parole board at minimum every 10 years and be considered. So I think one of the lies that people sort of feed themselves or think is that if somebody gets life, they're never coming home. It's not true. 95% of people in prison are going to return. Right? Some people get what's called life without possibility of parole, or LWOP, which is I've heard other people call that civil death, right? Because you're going to die in prison, right? But that's actually not that many people. And I think the sentencing guidelines, you see that the injustice of the sentencing guidelines, I think, when you do this work, because you meet people who were sentenced to crazy long sentences when they were juveniles. Right. And when you meet somebody who's sentenced at age 16, 17, 18, even 21, right? The thing, like, one of the questions to ask in the step-line exercise is, who did something really stupid before the age of 23, right? And that's nearly everybody in the room, if not everybody, right? And, that's where I think I find so much tragedy in the system, is when you meet these people who lived a difficult life as a child, right? And did something admittedly like real bad, right? But while they were children.
Right.
And then the state has said, there's no way you can ever be different. And that's, I think, a really important takeaway for people coming in. It's like, look, our government is created around this stuff because we, the people, tell them to do this stuff. Nobody ever got elected for being stopped on crime, right? And that, I think that's an important moment for folks to say, like, okay, what is my part in this?
Mm-hmm. Do you have offices that we should all be paying attention to, like elected officials? Because we pay attention only to the top of the ticket sometimes.
Yeah, look, I would be paying attention to your DA races.
Right.
Right. These DAs are, and there's a DA race in Los Angeles right now. That's an important race, and this stuff about criminal justice and sentencing and application justice is front and center in this race right now.
Okay.
Read up on it. Pay attention to it because it's important.
Okay, where's your vote right now?
I am not making an official organizational endorsement.
Right.
This is my personal opinion, right? Right. So my personal opinion on this is that I will be voting for Gascon for a district attorney, because he is not funded by police unions, and he has a record of approaching justice differently.
Yep. Okay, Andrew, you grew up here. You went to Harvard Westlake. You went to Harvard Westlake. You went to UCLA Business School. You're from around here. You went to Pomona or somewhere.
Pomona College. That's right. LA County. Lifer.
So I spend so much time talking about your program. But how did you go from that to here?
Yeah, look, it's well, my life has never really moved in a straight line as far as career paths go. But went to Harvard Westlake, had an amazingly privileged experience in school, and then I graduated business school in 2006. I ended up working for this entrepreneurial firm, ostensibly to do finance, but I ended up running a construction site. In that work, I met people on my job site, and in talking to them, I met people with criminal histories that I was aware of for the first time. And I remember this guy. He was a framer, and he was like, "It's like, so how'd you get into this work?" He's like, "Well, I didn't wake up one day and think about I want to be a framer, but I was a tweaker, and I was high on meth, and I stole a gun from a cop, and I was lucky I didn't kill him, and I ended up serving 3 years in prison, and this is what's open to me." And I had met a few other people. I had this realization of like, wow, if you have a felony on your background, a violent felony, like your opportunities are incredibly limited. And that was really when I first started to think about this idea of reentry. Cut to working at in education again with City Year, another great education nonprofit. But you see this school to prison pipeline happening. Kids growing up in South LA, East LA, wherever it is, right? And they're surrounded by generational poverty and violence. And, there's a certain path of least resistance that exists in those neighborhoods. I remember the first time I went to prison was California Institution for Women, and we went into this room and we did the step to the line exercise, and everybody was lined up there. And it just felt like I was in one of the high school auditoriums that I'd worked at City Year, in the detention room. And you look and you see all these faces and you're like, I think I know some of these stories here.
Right. So now what are you? Are you the CEO?
That's what they tell me. Yes. Yeah. Yes. I didn't start here though. I started as the executive director for Southern California.
Okay. Right. And it was a rapid rise to the top.
It was a battlefield promotion. Yes.
Yes. Battlefield promotion. But I mean, the reason I bring that up is because a lot of the founders that we work with, they've become founders without every qualification. It's not like they've run 1,000-person orgs or whatever. They find themselves somehow. And so one thing we always hear is that it's lonely at the top.
It is lonely at the top. So Defy's story was a little fraught. When I came in, we had a CEO and who was our founder. A lot of sort of classic founder syndrome stuff happened there. And then she left. And then I found myself, inheriting, which was essentially at that point a dumpster fire as a CEO. And I went through my own journey of self-limiting beliefs of like, what the hell am I doing here? I don't feel like I have agency here, right? I'm stuck. I'm not capable of doing this, right? I've never raised money before, in large amounts, and I have to figure out how to do this turnaround, and I feel like nobody is helping me.
And you don't want to. I mean, who wants a dumpster fire? Who wants to
right? Exactly. And So somebody, a coach said to me, so there's a guy, his name is Jason Jagger. He runs a coaching firm called Novus Global. And he was on one of the trips at that time. He's like, hey man, I'm going to coach you. It's like, okay, somebody else who wants to coach me, right? And he's like, no, we're going to do this. And so, I got on with him and he's like, hey man, what are you doing here? Right? Why are you here? And I was like, oh, well, somebody's got to do it. And, it's like, it's obligated and I don't want to let people down. He's like, yeah. Why are you really here? I was like, well, I also hate losing. Right. And he's like, okay, I buy that. But what he helped me realize relatively quickly was, look, man, no one's making you do this. So do it or don't do it, but stop complaining about it because you have a choice. And he's like, look, as long as you live in this world of I'm stuck here and I can't be successful, you are, right? And when you're the leader of the organization, you can't sort of pull everybody together and be like, hey, everybody, I feel really bad right now. And let me tell you how bad I'm feeling about this. And that's, I think that's a lot of it, but also learning how to convey vision, right? I mean, ultimately, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I thought of myself as a systems builder. Yeah. Like, that's my sweet spot. Is like taking something that somebody else made and then making it great.
Yeah, maybe being a systems builder was like a limiting belief, maybe.
I think you're right. I think you're right about that. No, you're absolutely right about that. It's like, I put myself in this box of like, well, I'm a systems builder. Like, that's what I'm good at. I'm not good at like vision and that kind of stuff. But in the end, right? I mean,
you can be.
Yeah. I mean, I needed to be and I was. Great. And yeah.
Okay. I have a philosophical question for you.
Go for it. Yeah.
So here's the question. How do people learn to forgive themselves?
Yeah. Well, so I would add to that, how do people learn to forgive others and themselves? I think they're both tough, right? I think it is easier to forgive others than it is to forgive oneself in some ways, or in a lot of ways. I think you learn to forgive yourself by practicing it. I mean, you have to start by saying, I mean, look, the whole affirmation, right? I mean, I don't know if you remember Saturday Night Live and the guy would get in the mirror like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me, right? And we all sort of laugh at that sort of mode of affirmation, and it sort of feels weird to do it. But in reality, right, that self-affirmation, it is hugely important because you are practicing you're practicing your self-belief at that point, right? And I think forgiveness is the same thing. Is that if you say, you know what, I forgive myself for this, right? I am like, I know I messed up. I feel guilt about messing up, right? Like, I feel bad about doing that. I certainly regret it. I don't want to do that again. But I'm not going to live in that space and make that define me. And I think that's a lot about what self-forgiveness is to say, I am forgiving myself for doing that and recognizing that that's not the person that I am anymore. And we tell that to our EITs all the time, is like, look, when you do affirmations, and we do those affirmations, you might be faking it till you make it there, right? But you got to say it like you mean it. And one day you will mean it. And that's how you change that belief about yourself. And I think forgiveness is the same thing.
Whew, that's good. Okay, Andrew, we're going to have to wrap up. So maybe we end with some affirmative statements. Andrew, you are awesome. This podcast was awesome. The work you are doing for the entrepreneurs in your program, each individual is so meaningful to them. And I appreciate what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to offer some affirmations to you too, which is, I think you're awesome. And I love that you're willing to talk about this stuff and share it with your audience and be part of our program. And if I could just put a plug in for folks who are interested, check us out, www.defyventures.org. If you want to get in touch, somebody wants to get in touch with me directly about supporting the program, Andrew at defyventures.org.